was a time not that long ago, especially if you consider 10 to 15 years ago, not that long ago, where CBR.com was a big deal. Comic book resources and Newsarama were kind of, I guess, the successors to Wizard Magazine, your go-to spot for your geek culture news, and it was kind of a big deal. They're always putting out really good scoops on comic books. Obviously, comic books were in a better situation then, so your message traffic was a lot better then for CBR and Newsarama. People were more interested in it, and today they're just kind of like shelves of themselves, especially Newsarama. Like, they were bought up by like a gaming site, and you might get 2 or 3 articles like during the week on there, and none of them are very good, and they're all trying to be like tied into movies and video games or whatever. You don't really even get any comic book reporting on that one. CBR is in a better spot, kind of, but they are in the final death throes of whatever's happening to them. I imagine they're going to be sold off or maybe consolidated into something else like Collider, maybe. But it sounds like we aren't going to be getting a whole lot of comic book news from them in the future. There was recently an article on the Comics Beat from Heidi McDonald, not exactly the most reliable source in the world, but you can't really get this story wrong. And obviously the thing that predicates this or really kicks this off is this tweet that happened last week. It was absolutely hilarious. Or maybe it was this week. Maybe it was earlier this week. I don't know. It was pretty funny. Somebody went rogue at CBR.com. I imagine it's one of their freelance journalists, if you want to call them journalists. They took over the Twitter feed and really exposed some issues as they are basically dying this slow, hilarious death. It's never really a good time for comics journalism, but this might be one of the worst times. CBR, aka Comic Book Resources, has been going through a reorganization behind the scenes that has seen most of its editorial staff either be laid off or quitting in support. While social media has been hinting at the behind-the-scenes drama at CBR for days, the doors got blown wide open yesterday when the official CBR Twitter account posted, "Despite rumors to the contrary, we have not eliminated our news section. We simply fired all the new editors who didn't resign in protest and have been slowly gutting our other departments as Valnet continues CBR's shift to an AI-driven, clickbait-focused content mill." And while I am not the most fond person in the world when it comes to the content being put out by CBR.com, there still are a couple of really good writers there that have some interesting takes and some very honest takes on the comic book industry as a whole, specific characters, DC, Marvel, stuff like that you can actually trust. But for the most part, CBR isn't like a go-to source when it comes to good, honest comic book journalism. Everything pretty much comes from like a really biased opinion, which is fine. You can have biases, especially when you're doing opinion pieces, but when you're stating facts, you actually have to be factual and back up the facts with the facts that are at hand, and they don't seem to be doing this one. But I do applaud whoever it is at CBR.com that took over the Twitter account and put out that post, because it was funny. I kind of liked it, and it absolutely put a spotlight on something that is happening at CBR that you can kind of see if you're paying attention. So what happened was CBR.com, owned by Valnet, drove down the rates on their freelance journalists, the people that were writing all these articles, and a bunch of the editors quit because they were going to become more of a, I guess, clickbait content time farm. But all these sites like CBR, Newsarama, and Adventures of Poor Taste, that's what all these sites are anyway. There are only a couple of sites out there that are actually trying to do journalism. And as much as I do make fun of the popverse.com, I do believe they are actually trying to do journalism when it comes to geek culture, trying to focus it on comic books, but also doing movies and video games and television, stuff like that. So I will give them a little a kudo out there. I see what you're doing out there, the popverse.com. You're trying to be an alternative to CBR.com, and a lot of the stuff that they put out is a little bit better. And if it's opinion driven, they'll kind of tell you that it's opinion driven. So CBR.com, under the leadership of Valnet, decided to cut the rates of all their journalists, their freelance journalists. Most of the editors resigned in protest, and I believe the 2 that weren't were actually fired not too very long after. There's been a lot of upheaval at CBR.com, but I will say this, just as somebody that does look at CBR basically on a daily basis, I have seen no increase or decrease in quality. It basically seems to be the same site with or without their editors, and I don't think that speaks very highly of the site itself. That's just my opinion. And one of the charges, obviously, in that tweet is that they're using AI to write their articles, and I 100% believe that they are. Not all the writers at CBR.com are using AI, ChatGPT specifically, to assist them or even whole cloth write these articles for them. But I believe there are at least 2 or 3 people whose output is so great in comparison to the time that they would have to actually create that I don't think it's actually humanly possible for them to research the articles themselves, write them, and then submit them for editorial oversight there at the end. I think a lot of them are actually being driven by AI, if not being wholly written by AI, outlined by them. And you can see there's like a bias or perspective from ChatGPT. It's actually pretty funny. If you go to ChatGPT and say, I want to make a YouTube video about comic books today, what should I do? It'll be like, you should do a video about the importance of diversity in comic books. I'm not even joking. In fact, I was looking for a title. I was having trouble coming up with a title for a YouTube video. It was going to be about how James Gunn, I believe this video is already out, or it should be, really didn't have a path forward to success for the DCU. And this is what ChatGPT told me. They actually reprimanded me. It is important to maintain a respectful and fair tone in creating video titles or content about individuals. James Gunn is a well-respected director, and focusing solely on his potential lack of success may not present a balanced perspective. So you can't be critical really in ChatGPT from a certain point of view, or it will actually give you a tongue lashing. And you can see like a lot of the stuff that CBR is writing, like you can see ChatGPT saying stuff like that. It's actually pretty funny. Like you will see quotes like that in the articles. So I do think a lot of stuff is being written by AI at this point for CBR. Now, CBR is denying this. CBR managing editor John Adverden pushed back against the negative tweet with a few of his own. First up, someone did this with an old third-party login, and the info in the tweet is 100% false, he wrote. In response to another post that suggested Valnet was turning to AI, Adverden wrote, absolutely not. I created our current AI policy myself, which stipulates that anyone found using AI to generate articles will be subject to termination. Well, just because you have a policy doesn't mean everyone's following it, first off. And if you would like to email me, I can point you in the direction of some people I just suspect are using AI to fully create their articles or generate, for the most part, most of their article, throwing a couple of tidbits, changing of words here and there, to make it, I guess, their own or something like that. Mr. Averden, because I'm pretty sure you have an infestation of AI generated articles, not only in the comic book content on comic book resources, but all the movie, television stuff and whatever. There are certain hallmarks when it comes to AI generated articles, and you can see a lot of them coming from CBR. The way that they're written, like the tense that they use, the way that the author is presenting the information doesn't, for the most part, with certain writers, feel like it's being generated by a human. And you can kind of see that, especially once you use ChatGPT a little bit. I know there are probably people out there with YouTube channels that are using ChatGPT to write scripts and stuff for them. Me personally, I used to script all my content here on the channel when I first started. And I can tell you right now, writing a script for just a 9-minute video or a 12-minute video on YouTube took me hours upon hours. Now, I didn't have an editor, and I was kind of doing it all myself, but just the research alone, especially when you're talking about comic books, because you can't really get anything wrong. You can have differences of opinions, but once you start stating facts about characters and you get it wrong, there's like 40 dudes out there like, but really, you don't know nothing about Power Girl. I'm the Power Girl expert, and they'll shit all over you and laugh at you or whatever. And deservedly so if you're putting out bad information. So actually writing these articles, especially about things that happened 20 and 30 years ago, is actually quite a daunting process. It takes a lot of time. And I believe with the amount of money that Valnet and CBR are paying, that a lot of these writers are actually turning to AI just to meet up with quotas and make enough money, to feed their family. Like I think this one lady was saying she was working 50 hours a week and making $2,000 a month at CBR.com before she quit or whatever. There's somebody else that said they had a quota of 7 articles a day. That's absolutely bullshit. There's no one that I've seen, at least that's doing comic books, that's making 7 articles a day. There's a couple people that are doing like 3 articles a day, which I still think is bullshit. I still think that's AI generated or assisted. You know what I'm saying? It's definitely something weird that's going on there. This is kind of, like I said, the final death throes of CBR.com. The article from the Comics Beat concludes with Heidi McDonald stating, what is going on at CBR? Details are vague, but we're hearing that all of the verticals topic are being merged into one, so that comics will no longer be its own news department. Things such as lists, news, and features will also be one giant team. According to one post, comics coverage may be drastically reduced to as little as 5 stories per day. And I'll be honest, just like the way the comic book industry is going, it probably doesn't warrant 5 stories a day. There aren't 5 interesting things that are happening within comic books just as far as news to cover per day. Now, you do get your lists out there, but those get pretty generic and monotonous after a little while. And a lot of their features are just, they're kind of laughable. I'll talk about it here on the channel just to make fun of how stupid they are. So I understand them moving everything and consolidating all these departments and stuff to cut down on cost, because here's the real thing that's happening. Yes, AI is a problem. It's definitely invested CBR.com. But what's really happened is the ad rates have gone down dramatically. Just for news websites in general, specifically in geek news websites, as I understand it, have dropped more than basically everyone else. And then the amount of traffic that you get from a CBR.com or a Newsarama has also been cut down, and it's about to get worse because a lot of these sites had like a symbiotic relationship with Facebook back in the day where people would post the articles, they would share them around, and a lot of people would consume them, basically with Facebook kind of like sharing the information out there. Well, Facebook was like, well, we don't feel like we're making enough money on it. You know, obviously the originator is getting ad revenue, but we're getting a little bit of ad revenue. We want to become our own publisher and then promote stuff that we have a part in, a stake in, so we can make even more money. And that's basically why Facebook is like so fucking bullshit these days. It's just a bunch of posts that are being promoted by Facebook from content creators that are like in league with Facebook themselves. The same exact thing is going to happen with Twitter very soon. And I can tell you, just like on YouTube, maybe not on a geek news website or something like that, Twitter has never been like a driving factor in my channels as far as views. More like YouTube searches is really the driving factor, and then maybe some Google searches, stuff like that. But I believe back in the day, Twitter used to be a driving factor as far as viewership and engagement with a lot of these sites. And what Elon Musk is doing now is basically what Mark Zuckerberg already did with Facebook like 5 years ago, to where you can post an article or whatever, but most people aren't even going to see it anymore. It won't be circulated unless the article you posted or you yourself have an agreement with Twitter themselves, like you're a premium member, you get the check mark and stuff like that. So it's going to be harder and harder to make money with these kind of old, antiquated websites. And I imagine we're going to see an even bigger like infiltration of AI-driven content, like pushing these things forward, because you could put so much of it out and you only have to have a couple of things hit every day. And maybe you get the right buzzwords at the right time, the right place, and you can keep these things going forward without actually having to pay people to do it. I think that's kind of the future for CBR, basically all the stuff about it. You're talking Collider, Screen Rant, a lot of those kind of geek websites are all under Valnet, and I don't think there's really a future for any of this stuff when it comes to like human created content. Because first Facebook and now Twitter basically destroyed the ecosystem that created a balance for there to where you could actually have a website like that and actually make money and generate the views and the ad revenue and all that kind of stuff. One of the big things that's really hurt CBR and Newsarama and Bleeding Cool and some of these other websites, especially the comic book websites, the geek culture websites, is the weird adversarial relationship between the consumers, the fans themselves, and the media themselves. They're always calling us toxic and stuff like that. In my opinion, they got it all backwards. I think it's the shill media themselves. It's the comic book websites like CBR that are a lot more toxic than the fans themselves. If you haven't seen this, definitely check it out right now. There's also a link in the video description.